Nobody in medieval Europe imagined that the world they lived in was only a fraction of what truly existed, yet within just a few generations. Mysterious lands on maps turned into bustling trade ports. Isolated civilizations collided for the first time, and oceans that once separated humanity suddenly became the highways of global connection. But how did all of this begin? Why did a handful of European powers suddenly burst out across the world, after centuries of staying close to their own shores? Why did the greatest empires, from China to India to the Ottoman world, fail to dominate the oceans first? And how did a few voyages, carried out by sailors who barely understood the size of the planet, end up creating the modern globalized world? In this video, we're going to answer those questions. We're going to uncover how the age of exploration began, what forces pushed Europeans to the seas, why these journeys transformed the world forever, and how this era connected humanity into one global system for the first time. So, let's begin. The story of global exploration doesn't start with Europe, it starts with desire. The desire for wealth, spices, knowledge, and routes to the east. By the 1400s, Europe was recovering from the Black Death. Populations were rising again, trade was expanding, and kingdoms were increasing their wealth. But there was a problem. Europe wanted Asian goods, pepper, cinnamon, silk, porcelain, but reaching Asia was nearly impossible. The old Silk Road was controlled by the powerful Ottoman Empire and other middlemen who charged enormous taxes. This made spices unbelievably expensive, and kings were frustrated that they had no direct path to the luxuries of the East. Meanwhile, new technologies were emerging. The magnetic compass, originally Chinese, the astrolabe, improved by Arab sailors, and new ship designs like the Portuguese caravel suddenly made long-distance sea travel safer and more predictable. This combination created a perfect storm. European kingdoms had the motivation, the technology, and the economic pressure to try something no one had done before: sail into the unknown. Portugal moved first. Under Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese sailors began exploring the west coast of Africa. They weren't trying to reach the Americas or circle the globe. Their goal was simple: find a sea route to India by traveling around Africa. It was slow, dangerous, and often deadly, but Portugal kept pushing further south: Cape Beador, Cape Verde, the Gulf of Guinea, each new discovery encouraging the next. By 1488, Bartolomeu Dias achieved something remarkable. He reached the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. Suddenly, the idea of reaching India by sea was no longer fantasy. But before Portugal could realize that dream, another European kingdom changed the world forever: Spain. In 1492, an ambitious sailor named Christopher Columbus claimed he could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic. His calculations were completely wrong, and almost every scholar knew it. The Earth was far larger than Columbus believed. But what he didn't know was that the massive continents unknown to Europeans lay in his path. When he reached the Caribbean, he believed he had found islands near Japan. In reality, he had stumbled into the Americas, a place Europeans did not even know existed. Columbus's voyages triggered a chain reaction. Spain rushed to explore and conquer these new lands, while Portugal continued eastward. Then, in 1498, Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa and reached India. For the first time in history, Europe had a direct sea route to Asia. This was the moment the world truly began to connect. But the age of exploration wasn't only about glory and discovery, it was about power. European nations realized that whoever controlled global trade routes would control global wealth. And so began one of the fiercest competitions in history. Spain conquered vast parts of the Americas, extracting gold and silver that changed the world's economy. Portugal established a network of ports stretching from Brazil across Africa to India, Malaysia, and China. Soon, other European powers joined the race: England, France, and the Netherlands, each seeking colonies, trade routes, and resources. These voyages didn't just connect continents, they collided them. For the first time, plants, animals, diseases, cultures, religions, and ideas moved between the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia. This is known as the Columbian Exchange. Foods like potatoes, tomatoes, and corn left the Americas and spread across the world. Horses, rice, wheat, and sugar came from Europe and Asia. But it wasn't only goods that traveled, so did deadly diseases like smallpox, which devastated indigenous populations in the Americas. At the same time, millions of Africans were forcibly taken across the Atlantic into slavery, reshaping entire societies forever. The age of exploration was also a scientific revolution. As sailors traversed the seas, maps became more accurate. Knowledge of wind patterns, ocean currents, and geography expanded dramatically. European understanding of the world shifted from myth to measurement. The belief in a tiny, limited world was replaced by the realization that Earth was vast, interconnected, and filled with diverse civilizations. Yet there was one more monumental moment that defined this era, the first circumnavigation of the globe. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan led a Spanish-sponsored expedition to reach Asia by sailing west. The journey was brutal: storms, starvation, mutiny, and Magellan himself was killed in the Philippines. But his remaining crew pushed onward, eventually returning to Spain in 1522. They had sailed completely around the planet, proving beyond doubt that the world was far larger and more connected than anyone had imagined. By the late 1500s, the world was no longer a set of isolated regions. Oceans were no longer barriers, they were bridges. Trade connected Asia to Europe, Africa to the Americas, and every continent felt the impact of exploration. Cultures blended, kingdoms rose and fell, and global power shifted dramatically. But this new global world came with consequences: economic, empires, colonization, exploitation, and massive demographic changes. As the 16th century unfolded, the impact of exploration grew far beyond trade routes and discoveries. The voyages that began as quests for spices and gold soon created something far more powerful: global empires. Spain and Portugal were the early giants. Spain controlled enormous territories across the Americas, lands rich with silver, fertile soil, and millions of indigenous people whose societies were transformed or destroyed by conquest. Portugal built a vast network of trading posts, stretching from Brazil to the coast of Africa, India, and even Japan. But it wasn't long before other rising European states joined the competition. The Netherlands, a small but ambitious maritime nation, challenged Portugal's dominance in Asia. Dutch ships, faster, stronger, and backed by private investment through the world's first stock companies, attacked Portuguese ports, seized colonies, and soon controlled the lucrative spice trade. Meanwhile, England and France looked westward. They explored North America, claimed land, built settlements, and expanded their influence from Canada to the Caribbean to India. The age of exploration had transformed from discovery into a global struggle for wealth and supremacy. This competition reshaped the world in dozens of ways. One of the most important changes was economic. The massive inflow of silver from the Americas into Europe fueled a new kind of global economy. For the first time, wealth circulated across continents in large, interconnected networks. Goods produced in India were sold in Africa, traded for enslaved people, shipped to the Americas, and then returned to Europe. Sugar, tobacco, cotton, porcelain, spices. First, everything flowed through oceans like blood through veins. But exploration also produced something darker: the birth of the Atlantic slave trade. As European colonies in the Americas grew, so did their demand for labor. Plantation economies, especially sugar plantations in the Caribbean and Brazil, required millions of workers. Europeans turned to Africa, where local conflicts and existing slave systems were exploited to supply captives. For over 300 years, more than 12 million Africans were forcibly taken across the Atlantic in brutal, horrific conditions. Their labor built entire economies and reshaped societies on both sides of the ocean. The world became connected, yes, but often through violence and exploitation. Meanwhile, the indigenous civilizations of the Americas faced catastrophic decline. Diseases like smallpox and measles, which Europeans carried unknowingly, wiped out over 80% of many native populations. Empires like the Aztecs and Incas collapsed not only from conquest, but from epidemics that spread faster than armies. entire cultures changed forever as Christianity, European languages, and new political systems replaced ancient traditions. Yet even in tragedy, a second wave of transformation emerged: cultural and scientific exchange. New foods from the Americas revolutionized diets around the world. Potatoes and corn boosted populations in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Tomatoes transformed Mediterranean cuisine. Chocolate, coffee, and tobacco became global addictions. Meanwhile, European goods and technologies, guns, metal tools, domesticated animals spread across the Americas and parts of Africa, altering daily life. One of the most important changes was in knowledge. Exploration forced Europeans to question everything they believed. Old maps were wrong. Ancient Greek geography was flawed. The world was not divided into 3 continents surrounded by a single ocean. It was something far more complex, as explorers recorded new plants, animals, languages, and cultures. A scientific revolution began to take shape. Curiosity exploded. Universities and scholars started studying natural history, astronomy, and navigation in new ways. The age of exploration was not only about ships. It was about human curiosity expanding its boundaries. But the truly world-changing moment came in the 17th and 18th centuries, when exploration led directly to colonization. Britain, France, the Netherlands, Spain, and Portugal all built vast empires through war, trade, and diplomacy. They controlled territories across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. These empires shaped modern borders, languages, economies, and even conflicts. Many of today's political tensions, from the Middle East to Africa to South Asia, have roots in decisions made by European powers during this era. At the same time, the growing global economy reshaped Europe too. Nations became wealthier, cities grew, merchant classes rose to power, new financial systems, banks, stock exchanges, joint stock companies emerged, many inspired by the risks and profits of overseas trade. The world was no longer isolated continents. It was becoming one interconnected system. For better and for worse, by the time the 18th century arrived, the age of exploration had transformed into something bigger, the age of empire. Britain ruled North America, the Caribbean, and parts of India. France controlled huge territories in North America and West Africa. Spain dominated Latin America. Portugal held Brazil and trading outposts in Africa and Asia. The Netherlands controlled Indonesia and major parts of global commerce. Oceans were no longer unknown, they were highways of power. But one of the most significant effects of this era was cultural blending. Music, food, language, religion, and ideas crossed oceans like never before. African rhythms mixed with European instruments in the Americas. Asian art inspired European design. Indigenous knowledge shaped agriculture and medicine. Global cuisines emerged from the fusion of continents. The connected world we live in today, where food, fashion, and ideas travel instantly, began with ships crossing the oceans centuries ago. Yet as much as the age of exploration created connection, it also created conflict. The desire for global dominance led to wars like the 7 Years' War, often called the First True World War. Colonial rivalries fueled battles on multiple continents. Indigenous resistance movements rose against European control. New diseases, new religions, and new political systems created instability even as they created opportunity. And still, the age of discovery wasn't over. Explorers continued pushing further into the Arctic, the Pacific, Australia, and deep into the interiors of Africa and the Americas. By the 19th century, the map of the world was nearly complete. The age of unknown oceans was gone. The age of global powers had begun. So what is the real legacy of the age of exploration? It is complicated. It is both inspiring and painful. It is the story of bravery, ambition, curiosity, and the desire to reach beyond the horizon. But it is also a story of conquest, slavery, disease, and the destruction of ancient cultures. The age of exploration reshaped humanity more than almost any other period in history. It connected continents, created global economies, sparked scientific revolutions, and laid the foundations of the modern world. The world we live in today, our foods, our languages, our borders, our conflicts, And even our technologies can all trace their roots back to this era, when ships sailed into the unknown and accidentally created the globalized world. And that is how the age of exploration changed everything